Welcome to another session. This is one of many. This particular session is to cover the systems thinking thread in the systems thinking certification program. The agenda for today is I published another Navigating the Environment video, which is version 4. Even though if you've watched ones in the past, I would recommend that you watch this one because I finally picked up on the comments from a couple of people, and I actually recorded it with my settings the same way that yours are when you're inside of Kumu, so that you should see the windows the same way that you see them, as opposed to looking at my windows when I'm in edit mode and there's lots of other things on the screen that you don't see, and it just ends up being confusing. I'll talk about the fact that I added arrows to all of the threads so that hopefully they'll be easier to find your way through them. A new program operations segment that I added to the program, so it's now 13 segments as opposed to 12. I moved the location of the web session videos, so I need to tell you where they are. And talk about the web Q&A calendar that's been installed and the survey that's been installed, so that because this is no longer a fixed time program, how am I supposed to figure out when it's time to do a session on what? So I've installed a survey so that the participants can tell me when things should happen. And then I'll review the content of the systems thinking segment, and then we'll do a Q&A session. So, as I said, there's a new Navigating the Environment version 4, and I put a note here in bold. I would ask that you please pay attention to the updates and the date on here. I attempt to be extremely religious in terms of ensuring that when I change things in the environment, I post them to the updates segment and explain what it is that I've changed, and I go ahead and put and revise the date here so that you know the last date that I changed something significant that you should see in the environment. The thing that I said about arrows, when you look at the segments, you'll see that there are arrows on all of the segments, well, except the ones with dashed lines. So hopefully to make it easier, I mean, in this one it's probably more confusing than helpful, though you start at the green and go to the red, and because the red and green don't make any sense to colorblind people, maybe the arrows help. And once you get to a point, if there's a double directed arrow, it means you go there and come back, so that for this one you go here, and I should have put one here. I'll have to fix that, so that you go here and you go here and then you come back and then you choose where else to go. So hopefully the arrows are more helpful than confusing. This new segment, the program operations segment, which is now segment 0 because I didn't want to renumber all the other ones. Some comments about the environment led me to get a sense that what the comment was implying, that with the number of different components that have been wired together to make this useful or functional, it's like jumping off a cliff and trying to figure out how to build a parachute on the way down. So I went through and I created this whole program operations segment, and the intent was to talk about each one of the components that's used in this environment, why it's being used, and provide a video about that particular entity in its use in this context. And hopefully that helps a little bit with the learning curve of getting used to the environment itself. There's some question about big red muted sign next to green volume controls but can't adjust. I don't know what that means. Told you it's distracting. because, all right, so, and what I decided to do is I had intended to put all of the web session videos on the last element in the thread, though because they're harder to get to, what I decided to do is to put them on the label for the program element, so that, because when you click on this, that's where it takes you, is to that label. So the videos are easily, well, I think more easily findable when you want them, so that if I want the videos on systems thinking, all I got to do is click here, and they're what shows up on this profile page. So we'll see how that works out. Because of what I said about this now being a ongoing schedule or recurring, people are progressing at their own rate. And even though that is the case, my intent is to still keep the initial schedule if there is somebody that can actually make it through the sequence for the original timing. Though for most people, trying to go through this in 12 consecutive weeks is a bit ludicrous based upon ever-changing priorities and schedules, so that we turned it into a progress at your own rate, and sessions on the various segments will be scheduled as deemed appropriate, though I will do them when these will happen, but there will be a whole bunch of other ones. In terms of when they are, I don't know when they are, though they will be posted sometime. I mean, there'll be a few days ahead of time that I will post them for an opportunity for people to realize that they're going to be there. And within at least 15 minutes of the time of the session itself, the date time will turn into a link. So this is currently the link that most of you used to get here today. A few people said that the link wasn't showing up for some reason. It might be that you have to reload the Kumu page, because in other words, if you're on the page when I change it, it's not going to change on the fly. You need to reload Kumu to actually get the updated view of the page itself. But at least 15 minutes before the scheduled meeting, I will turn this into a link so that you can go there and just provide your name and your email address, and it will bring you right into the session. I've been getting there 20 or 25 minutes ahead, so I commit to being there at least 15 minutes before the session. I said that it's open to the first 100 people. The attendees have been more in the range of 40 to 50, so that I don't, if there's really a demand and people can't get into the session, I will add additional sessions so that people are not closed out of the web sessions should they want to attend them. The thing that I said about I can't, all right, there's a question about the double and single arrows on here. The single arrows say you go in that direction. When you get to a place where there's a double arrow, it says go there and then come back. So that if I'm following this, I go from here to here and then to here, and I get here, and I can go to here, but it also says go here and then come back. Because there are some things that are, in other words, this assumptions piece right here is relevant to this element, and this element. So I picked the double arrows to indicate that, well, you should, from here, you should go there and then come back and then go this way. And then when you get here, you should go there and come back. And when you get here, you should go there and come back. It's a little confusing, though it shouldn't be for too long. Back to the schedule. Because I can't, there is no way that I can sort of predict when it's appropriate to schedule a session. I've installed two surveys, one called Web Request, which says go here and tell me that you've finished a section and you really want a web session on that particular segment. And you can submit this multiple times. So that if you just finish the Insight Makers section and it's already passed and there isn't one scheduled for it, click and submit it to indicate that you want one. And I will monitor the counts as they pile up, and when it gets to a certain point, it sort of says, okay, you probably ought to schedule 1 or 2 sessions on this particular segment, and we'll see how this works out. And if it doesn't work out, then we'll figure out some other approach. But this is one that came to mind, and it fit well within the context without having to go somewhere else. The other point is, I don't know what the best times to do these are. I picked 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. because we did them at this time before. But you can go here and fill out this survey, and you can fill this out multiple times. Also, these are UTC times, all the way from -11 to +12, and indicate your preferences for times for web sessions. And I will do my best to be accommodating. I'm not sure I want to do one at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, but if 20 people tell me that's when they really want one, then I'll probably do one. So those are things that have been added to the environment to this point. All right, let me look at there's a comment about the link not showing up in one browser but another, but I'll have to check that. Julius has said that they will accept the role of organizer. So let me see if this works.
Hi, Gene.
Are you there, Julius?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi.
Okay. Are you looking at all the questions now?
I tried to find them. Polls, questions, double arrows.
And the place where the questions are, you can pop that window and make it larger. There's right to the left of the little X on the window, there's a little arrow pointing outward to up to the left that you can click on and unpin.
Okay, I found it. Yes.
Okay. So peruse the questions a little bit, and I'll come back in a minute, and you can feed me a couple.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I'll try. Yeah.
All right. So so the systems thinking segment itself, the intent was for the first segment to sort of begin to help develop an awareness of a systemic perspective from an experiential perspective, without getting too technical about it, to say here's some things that happen that might be unexpected, and it begins to provide a sense of the implications of connections. The systems thinking segment itself was actually intended to take you a little further down the rabbit hole to begin to be explicit about what a system is and what it isn't. Well, if you can find things that it's not. And the idea of feedback and emergence and boundary and why those aspects are relevant, and to surface the realization that it's difficult to have one single definition of a system that's universally appropriate, because everything ends up being so context dependent. And that's probably the reason why I provided all of these system classification segments down here as being optional, that there are things that the optional things are informative. though I don't consider them absolutely essential. So depending upon the time that you have to commit to the program, you begin and you walk the primary sequence, and when you finish, you can, if you have additional time available, you can look at the other aspects that seem interesting, that you want to delve into deeper. And so the idea was to provide an awareness of what is it that constitutes a system, and then how do you take that understanding of system and build on it to develop an awareness of what systems thinking is about, though to also provide an awareness that there are multiple perspectives or definitions as to what systems thinking itself means. Me personally, at one point in my life, I believed that systems thinking was a not very grown-up version of system dynamics. Fortunately, I grew up. So that the Jackson framework, which is presented down here, is currently, from my perspective, the best thing that I've come across to give me a sense of the entire arena that encompasses, of what systems thinking encompasses, and why there are such a myriad of different models and methods that embrace this systemic paradigm from a sensibility perspective. In other words, there are lots of different approaches, and it's appropriate to have those different approaches because they address situations in different contexts. It's like you don't have one set of shoes that fits everybody because feet are different. So the situations that you attempt to deal with are different, and in different contexts there are different requirements associated with those situations. So there are different approaches that are some more appropriate than others based in what the context is. So that was the intent. That was the Federal Express version of what the intent was for the systems thinking segment. And here I'd like to go into the Q&A session. So Julius, you have a question for me?
And basically, they are the questions related to browsing Kumu. So it's about the arrows. Can they be? Is there any implied sequence to the arrows and flows? Maybe I think you saw.
Well, I mean, each one of the segments begins with a green dot and ends on a red dot. This green dot ended up here because it's something that's referenced in the systems thinking overview, but it's actually the beginning of a completely different sequence, which is, I had to put it here for completeness, and I'm sorry if it's confusing, but the intent is that, if it begins with systems thinking and ends at systems thinking summary, you probably don't end with the thing called summary. And once you get to the green thing, you follow the arrows along the way. And if you run into an instance where there are double arrows, you take that path and then you come back. That's and also, I understand that in some browsers the dashed lines don't show up. The developers have said that it's a bug that they know about and they intend to fix, but they don't know how long. So if you're looking at the model and you don't see any dashed lines, though you see some solid connections with no arrows on them, they're optional. Another question, Julius?
There seems to be lack of questions at the moment. Susan asked about the, let's say, tracking. Is there any possibility to track your progress over the nodes?
No, there's the question has to do with the ability to track one's progress over time. There, there isn't a way to keep track of an individual's progress through the sequence, though if you get to a point and you want to make sure that you can come back to that point, what you can do on the bottom of every profile page, there's a permalink. Every profile page except the profile page for the entire map. There is no permalink on this page, but every other element has got a permalink. And if you click on that permalink and drag it to your bookmarks bar, it will put a bookmark there so that you can close your browser and come back to it later and click on that, and it will take you right back to this element in this sequence. Though when it takes you back to this element in the sequence, you're looking at the entire map. You're back to looking at this. But when you click on this, what do you mean not found? Oh, this is really good. I have to talk to the developers about that one. All right. Forget everything I said after hello. I'll go figure out what's wrong with this. So I guess you're just going to have to, well, you could do this one. Where was I? Systems thinking, and just to go back to that whole group. If I'm here, there is a bookmark here, so that I could bookmark this. All right, and hopefully this will take me back to that particular element. If I close this and go back here, that should take me back to the same place. But what happens is that you're inside of the entire map. So what you need to do is you need to click on Systems Thinking and then go back and do the selected again, so you're back to here. But it got you back into the same part of the map that you were in. I hope that's helpful. And I got to go find out why the permalink doesn't work, because they developed the permalinks so that they would work even if I changed the labels on things, but it doesn't work. So sorry. Next. That's the difficulty that you run into when you deal with brand new software. So. Next, Julius.
Okay. Just I got some very long question. I have to look at them. Just starting coming in. Just a second.
Well, while you're looking, I can talk to the one about system boundaries. Okay. There's two reasons that boundaries are relevant typically. One is there's a whole set of interactions associated with the situation that you can address. And then there are a whole set of things that you can't address. They're outside of your purview, outside of your area of attention, so that you draw the boundary to identify what's part of the addressable space and what's the environment that you have to figure out how to accommodate, because it's the context of the situation that you can't do anything about. Though what often is the case, which is why I included this particular model, this situation has to do with what happens when hospitals discharge people earlier than they really ought to. It ends up overloading the post-hospital services segment, and it ends up increasing the readmissions and a number of problems. Though, and what's associated with this situation is the hospital, post-hospital services, and the community. Though if you ask the people in the hospital about the system, this is the system from their perspective, and everything else is the environment. And if you ask the post-hospital services people about the system, this is the system and everything else is the environment. Though to address the post-hospital or the early discharge situation, all of these stakeholders have to be involved and figure out how to address the situation, because none of them can address it alone. It's so that you end up having this larger space as the addressable system that has to be considered and encompassed if you really want a solution. Otherwise, the hospital figures out what it wants to do and attempts to sell that solution to the community and post-hospital services, and it probably makes the situation better for the hospital and worse for the other two participants involved. And Ackoff was very fond of saying one should never improve any part of the system unless it improves the whole. The whole being all of those relevant influences that are associated with whatever the situation is that you're trying to deal with. So I hope that answered that question. Next.
Okay, there were basically questions about boundaries. We have two, and one is about determinants. Let's say Susan asks, can we come up with determinates to define a system case? She talks about, let's say, a veterinary medicine, when they have a structure for a case presentation and they want to get input on a case from colleagues, and can they come up with some kind of determinants to define the system case to easily understand, as I understand?
I don't understand the question. So I mean, Suzanne, send me an email. Okay. I mean, I'm not saying it's an invalid question. I'm just saying that in the context of the moment, it takes more thought than I want to take up of everybody else's time to figure out what the question means and how to respond to it. It's just the nature of being in this context with all of the other people on the call. So, you got something else?
Michael asks, what would be advice on what things you can start from when you begin drawing your rich picture or map for the model? It more comes from the previous session.
That sounds like a question that ends up better in the Insight Maker session, which is the next one. Okay.
Okay. Okay, no more questions yet?
No more questions. Janet said, I went to the Kumu site to look at the interactive map for one of the segments, but it's not there anymore. Only a link to Gene's recorded webinars. Janet, can you post the URL? Did you actually go to the content? In other words, if you do this, in other words, you're in a map of a collection of threads. If you select this, it takes you to this particular entity, which is attached to all of the connections and elements that are part of that segment. So that if I do this, then I get only that segment. But if I click here and hold it, well, if I'm looking at all of it and I click right there and hold it, the only thing I now have is that. Or I could have just that item itself, so that there's nothing else on this map at the moment. But if you click and hold in the background, it will always bring everything back. It's the way the environment was constructed, so that you can actually go to a segment and that selects that item and all of the things that are directly connected to it. It's essentially a focus of direct, but you could go to a focus of indirect, which says 2 levels away from whatever it is that you're connected to. But then that's all you're looking at. But if you click in the background, you're back to looking at everything. Hopefully that takes care of that. I mean, the mechanics do take a little bit of getting used to. Julius, you got another one?
Yes, Laura asks, she refers what you have been talking to and asks, you should not address a part of a system that if would not improve the whole system. So if we don't affect the system through parts, then how can we affect change if we don't take the change in doing so? Meaning how we affect a system may not directly affect the whole, but really it will, and you won't know if it's a good or a bad intervention unless you do it. Does that make sense?
Well, you can never be absolutely certain about much of anything, though from what I have come to understand is that it makes sense to begin with a situation that you want to deal with as opposed to trying to figure out how to deal with the system, because what Ackoff also said is regardless of where the situation typically appears, the problem is really usually someplace else, so that you think that you have a sales problem, and as it turns out, it's not really a sales problem. It is, in fact, a production distribution problem, and your customers are tired of waiting for lengthy delivery times and they're buying from somebody else. So the problem isn't in sales, the problem is someplace else in the organization. But you have to start with where the situation appears, and you have to build the relevant relationships until you find all of the relevant relationships that come to bear on the situation to begin to understand what's really happening, so that while in this particular situation, the hospital is probably experiencing higher than desired readmission rates, and from the typical way that organizations look at things, the hospital says, well, it's not my problem, it's the post-hospital services that are screwing up. They're not taking care of the patients that we're releasing, so we have to figure out how to get them to do their job. And when actually it turns out that it's the hospital that's releasing the patients too early to begin with. But until they collectively get together and understand what's going on, they'll each take action that probably ends up making the situation worse overall. So the point was that you begin with the situation and you synthesize the relevant system based upon all of the relevant interactions, and then once you begin to understand all of the pieces and who the stakeholders are that have to be involved to figure out what it is they're trying to address, you don't want to do something that fixes, that improves just a piece of the puzzle, because it probably makes the rest of the situation worse. That's what I think I was getting at.
Okay, there's a question regarding boundaries. How do you affect system-based change when dependent stakeholders in the environment are dynamic? In other words, the stakeholders are changing frequently, and so their behaviors are unpredictable.
So that's why it's not appropriate to implement a solution and think it's done. I mean, when you, if you're cultivating a garden, you don't go out once and pull the weeds and think you don't ever have to tend the garden again and you'll get a good crop out of it. You have to continue, but you have to put things in place so you continue to monitor what's going on. And as things change, the system needs to adjust to address what's changing, so that where this is what we have collectively decided enables us to deal with the situation today based upon what we understand. We can't then just go away and forget it, because things in the environment will change and it won't be the solution tomorrow. It's most systems thinkers readily admit that the majority of the problems that we face today are the direct result of yesterday's solutions, because we just did something quick and dirty to take care of it and thought that that would just take care of it. But it doesn't. It comes back to haunt us. Next.
Okay. There's a question from Jorgen. When considering that, for instance, the doors are not an essential part of the system that a car is, doesn't that have to do with how you define the system's purpose?
Well, and that, okay. And Ackoff talks, the automobile is an example that Ackoff uses or used often in his talks. And he said that systems often have essential components and non-essential components. The essential components are the ones which, if they don't operate the way that they're supposed to, the system cannot fulfill its purpose. And then there are those things which are not essential. Without them, the system can still fulfill its purpose. So in the case of the automobile, if you take the purpose of the automobile to be something that transports you from point A to point B, then the engine is essential because it doesn't go anywhere without the engine. The doors are not essential because you can take the doors off and you can still go to point A, from point A to point B. If you define the purpose of the automobile as a vehicle to take you from point A to point B safely, then taking the doors off, then the doors may in fact be essential components of the system, because it's hazardous to drive the vehicle without the doors on it. If you assume that the purpose of this automobile is a showpiece that never gets driven anywhere, then there are probably lots of pieces that are not essential unless you look under the hood or underneath the car itself. I mean, it depends upon, or the essential parts depend upon what you define the purpose of something to be. And most things have multiple purposes. I mean, you know, the alarm clock can be used to tell time, can be used to wake you up, can be a paperweight, can be something you throw at the dog when it's barking and you're trying to sleep. I mean, it depends. Next.
Okay, Robert asks you to expand on your thoughts on procedures versus process.
Oh,
versus
Robert,
system.
I just sent you that answer. Robert posted this question on one of the discussion lists, and I pondered it for 2 days before I responded to it. And his initial post was very good in that he talked about procedures, processes, and systems, where a procedure is a definition of how to go about doing something. A process is a sequence of steps that actually accomplishes something, and a system is a set of interactions that has emergent characteristics. And I wish I had the post so I could just post it because it would be easier. Because my comment was that any procedure worth its salt probably should have something implemented so that it, in the how it describes that you should go about doing something, tells you to look for feedback and adjust, so that there are times when the procedure has alternative ways that you go about doing things based upon the situation as you're trying to deal with it. And a process that's intended to produce a result probably should have feedback paths so that the process itself adjusts based upon so that the upstream activities adjust based upon the downstream results. And the whole idea of rework, so that if there are parts coming out of the process that that don't meet quality standards, then, if the upstream process isn't adjusting, well, then it just keeps producing stuff that doesn't meet specs. And then the idea of the system, the set of interactions, so that a process can be a system because of the nature of the interactions and the emergent characteristics that it produces. And that's probably as close as I'm going to get, Robert, off of the top of my head. I mean, I had to think about it 2 days to answer it to begin with. Next.
Okay, I have a question. Okay, I have a question. Last week, Carval asked, I think I pronounce his name right, asked a question regarding what's the difference between system thinking and design thinking. Has there been any information gathered on this?
There probably has, but probably not by me. I think the answer that I gave last week, which I still think is valid, it has to do with, Sengi in the fifth discipline talked about who is it that has the greatest control over the operation of a ship. Is it the captain who directs where to go? Or is it the helmsman who actually turns the rudder and defines which direction they're going? Or the navigator who lays out the course? Or is it the designer who actually designs the ship itself that directs how it's supposed to be built? And it is actually the designer who has the greatest amount of control over the ship, at least until it actually gets built, and then it's in the hands of the captain and all of the other people that are on board. But from the outset, it is the designer who has the greatest amount of control over the system. So from systems thinking ends up, for the most part, being an endeavor to understand and learn about systems, to understand, to figure out how to deal with them. And design thinking has more to do with understanding how to fabricate them to begin with so they work well and don't have to be fixed afterwards. Does that work? Who's giving me orange flags? No.
I just thought for myself.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay, Robert commented, thanked you, and he says that he has a good reflection.
Robert just wanted to see if I remembered what I wrote in the post. That's what it was.
Okay, I have maybe a question now, as there is none coming in. Is there any normative language for system thinking? Meaning that, is there any probably agreed way of describing system, not graphically, but by means of text?
Well, okay. Systems are essentially sets of relationships. And I know I've read lots of articles written by presumed systems thinkers who write page after page of text, and they never draw any pictures. And I don't know how they do it. Because personally, when it gets to beyond a couple of relationships, I'm lost without a picture. I have to draw a picture before I can understand, before I can really get a sense of all of the things that are interacting together. There are, in terms of developing diagrams, there are an endless array of different types of diagrams that one can use. Personally, I use rich pictures, causal loop diagrams, and stock and flow diagrams. For me, they have been sufficient. I know a dozen other types of diagrams that I could use. I haven't run into a situation where I have needed that, where I could use them without them causing more confusion than being helpful. There are 3 or 4 other types that we figured out how to do with Insight Maker quite rather easily. I mean, we can do mind maps, and we can do systemograms, and there's another one I forget. And if you're really interested in models, in the thread material itself, there's a link to Scott Page's model thinking course. It's a course that is a fixed time frame, and it begins at different times. And I also found the list of all the videos, so that rather than actually taking the course, you can just go watch all the videos. And it's a marvelous course. He presents dozens of different approaches to modeling things to help understand situations. They are not all what I would consider systemic. So, right, next.
Regarding the Scott's course, I took it, and it's actually marvelous too.
Oh, good.
A very good one. Jürgen asks, do you have a nice model of groupthink as a system? Maybe it's relating to a collaborative model building.
Have him send me a note in the forum, and I will look for one and post it in the discussion thread. Have him elaborate. I mean, groupthink is a well-defined kind of thing where a group of people operating together end up agreeing with each other at times when sometimes they really shouldn't. I mean, they're not critically assessing the situation they're into, sort of a group mind meld, and it's often harmful because they end up agreeing to do things that they shouldn't agree to do. And I'm not sure if that's the groupthink he's talking about or some other aspect of the way groups get mired in their stuff. So, okay. Oh, it is. Okay. Let me make a note. Groupthink. All right. Another question?
Nothing coming in.
Nothing. I'm not that clear. I'm not that clear.
More or less about the same.
Oh, okay. All right. I hope that you're all finding the material informative and useful, and I actually encourage you to provide me with feedback as to where things can be improved. I mean, it's when Scott and I wrote Beyond Connecting the Dots last year, modeling for meaningful results or something like that. It was a thought on doing something that was interactive, though what has been put together in this program is more what we really should have done last year, because as soon as we published that, even though it's in electronic form, going from the source and going through all of the contortions that one has to get to make a finished product available is a real pain. Though in this environment, I mean, there have been times when somebody sent me a message and said, there's an invalid link here because it gives me a 404, and 5 minutes later it was fixed for everybody. So that this is an environment that can readily evolve based upon the feedback from you, and I encourage you to help me do that so that it actually gets better for everyone.
Okay, there's a point, let's say, from the person that asked about design thinking, what he considers to be the difference. Design thinking focuses on creating the design of a system. System thinking focuses on understanding the interconnections and interrelationships between parts comprising a system. So as now, how best affect change in the system? So as no, how best affect changes? It's not maybe clear for the part.
Well, all right. The best way to affect change in the system is based on identifying leverage points, and we will get to those in enabling a better tomorrow, segment 5. There is specifically a portion there about leverage that talks about the Donella Meadows leverage points document, which is absolutely fabulous, and trying to cover it here probably ends up being more confusing than useful because it's rather involved. I mean, it's not a 1-minute answer. It's more like an hour answer.
Jorgen, that gave a question about groupthink as a system, asks additionally, considering practice communities and practice networks, do you have some thoughts on this?
I don't understand. Read me the question again.
Considering practice communities and practice networks, do you have some thoughts on this? It's probably when you're talking about group think.
Yeah. Which one gets stuff done? Right? Mm-hmm. I'd go with whichever one gets stuff done. I'm practicing communities or practicing networks. I can't. I don't know. I'm sort of befuddled about differentiating between them.
Okay. No more questions.
Okay. Well, hope you found it an interesting session, and we'll have more in the future. The whole idea is that the week before the web sessions on a particular thread, the idea is that you work through the material. If you have questions, post them on the discussion thread. You are much more likely to get a more in-depth answer if you post the question on the discussion thread, because, I mean, like the question about process and system and procedure, I mean, I thought about it for 2 days before I posted a response. So, and here in this context, I get to think about the answer for about 5 seconds before I have to give you a response. And I monitor all the threads on an ongoing basis. I'm only online 24/7, so I'll do my best to respond to the questions. I still see the appropriateness of doing web sessions, though. If you want an in-depth response, the discussion thread is likely to be a better source for doing that. So. Okay, thank you everyone, and we'll the video for this will be online in probably half hour or so. So take care, and I'll see you in the next session. Bye.